Robert drove the same car for 12 years, not because he could not afford a new one, because every time he thought about upgrading, he thought about the number instead, $700,000. That was the finish line he had drawn in his head sometime around his 35th birthday, and for the next 3 decades, every financial decision he made was measured against it. New car versus the number, family vacation versus the number. The kitchen renovation his wife asked about for 6 years versus the number. By 64, Robert had crossed it, $740,000. He retired on a Friday in January. His wife cried at the party. His colleagues gave speeches about his patience and his discipline. His children told him how proud they were. Robert shook every hand in the room and felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely free. 18 months later, he was back at work. Part-time at a hardware store 20 minutes from his house, not because he wanted to be, because the math left him no other choice. And here is the thing that makes Robert's story so important. He did not make a single bad investment decision. He did not get greedy. He did not ignore advice or take reckless risks. Robert did everything right for 30 years. He followed every rule he had ever been taught about building wealth. And those rules, the exact same rules that built his $740,000, are what destroyed it. Ray Dalio has spent 50 years studying how wealth is built, protected, and lost across 5 centuries of economic history. He manages over $124 billion at Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund on earth. He predicted the 2008 financial crisis when most of Wall Street was still celebrating. He has advised central bank sitting presidents and some of the wealthiest families on the planet. And when he looks at people like Robert, intelligent, disciplined people who arrive at retirement with far less than they planned, he does not see victims of bad luck. He sees people who mastered one game and never realized a completely different game had already begun. If you are over 40, what you are about to hear might reframe everything you think you know about retirement. Because the threat to your financial future is not the market, not inflation, and not your investment choices. It is something more fundamental than any of those things. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happened to Robert, why it keeps happening to careful people, and the specific steps that the people who actually protect their wealth in stage 3 take before it is too late. Dalio describes every person's financial life in 3 distinct stages. The first is the learning years, the early decades of building skills, absorbing experience, figuring out who you are and what you are capable of. Stage 2 is what follows, the long working years of earning, saving, and accumulating, the decades before retirement where you are building towards something. This is the stage the entire financial industry is built around. Every book about investing, every piece of advice about compound interest and retirement accounts was designed for someone still in that accumulation phase, with decades of runway ahead of them. Stage 3 is what comes after. The transition beyond work, the chapter that everything before it was supposedly preparing you for. And here is the brutal irony at the heart of Dalio's research. The habits and instincts that made you successful in stage 2, the discipline to save relentlessly, the patience to hold through volatility, the reflex to keep accumulating. Those same qualities carried unchanged into stage 3 will work systematically against you. The behavior that built your wealth is now destroying it, not because you did anything wrong, because the rules changed completely and nobody handed you a new playbook. Now, back to Robert, and why what happened to him was not bad luck. When Robert retired in January with $740,000, he began drawing $4,000 every month from his portfolio to cover his living expenses. $4,000 a month was reasonable, conservative even, by most standard retirement planning calculations. And then the market dropped 38%. Here's where the stage 3 trap closes completely. In stage 2, a 38% market drop is painful but survivable. You hold, you wait, the market recovers. You have time and you have income, so you never have to sell anything at the bottom. But Robert was no longer in stage 2. He had no income. He needed $4,000 every month, regardless of what the market was doing. So every single month while the market was falling, Robert was selling shares at their lowest price just to cover his basic expenses. By the time the market recovered 2 years later, Robert's portfolio did not recover with it. The shares he sold at the bottom were gone. They were no longer in his account. They could not grow back. He had converted them into grocery bills and electricity payments at 30 cents on the dollar, and that transaction was permanent. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it is the single most underestimated threat to stage 3 financial security that exists. Not because it is complicated, because nobody explains it until it has already happened. And when it happens fast. And by the time you understand what is occurring, the damage is already done. Dalio has identified this same pattern in different forms with different assets in different countries. In every single major debt cycle he has studied across 500 years of history. It is not a modern problem. It is not uniquely American. It is a stage 3 problem. And the reason it keeps recurring generation after generation is that the people managing the financial services industry have every incentive to help you accumulate in stage 2, and very little incentive to fundamentally restructure how you think before stage 3 begins. Before we go deeper into the 2 psychological reasons that made Robert vulnerable in the first place, if this is your first time on this channel, what we do here is translate Ray Dalio's research and frameworks into practical language for people making real financial decisions. If that sounds useful, subscribe right now. The next video in this series covers the specific portfolio structure Dalio's framework points to for stage 3 protection. And you will want to see it before you make any significant financial moves in the next 12 months. Now here's where it gets deeper. Because sequence of returns risk is the mechanical reason Robert ended up at the hardware store. But Dalio's research points to 2 psychological reasons that made Robert vulnerable to it in the first place. And understanding both of them is what separates the people who protect their stage 3 wealth from the people who do not. The first psychological trap is what we might call the discipline paradox. Robert spent 30 years building one of the most valuable financial muscles a person can develop, the ability to delay gratification, to hold through discomfort, to resist the impulse to spend or change course when things felt uncertain. That muscle was the reason he had $740,000 at 64. It was genuinely admirable. But in stage 3, that same muscle became a liability. Because stage 3 requires a fundamentally different skill, the ability to strategically deploy capital rather than accumulate it, to spend intelligently rather than save reflexively, to convert paper wealth into real, accessible money before the conversion is forced on you at the worst possible moment. Robert's 30-year-old instincts told him that spending felt like failure. So he kept his portfolio almost entirely in growth-oriented assets because that is what had worked for 30 years. And when the drawdown came, he had no buffer, no liquidity cushion, and no mechanism to avoid selling at the bottom. The second psychological trap is the confidence problem. And Dalio knows this one personally in a way that almost nobody else does. In 1982, Dalio was at what felt like the peak of his professional confidence. He had spent years studying debt cycles with meticulous care. He concluded that a depression was coming, and he said so publicly on national television, to his clients, to anyone who would listen. He positioned everything around being right. He was completely catastrophically wrong. The economy boomed. The market surged. His clients left. His reputation collapsed. He had to lay off his entire staff. He had to borrow $4,000 from his own father just to meet his most basic obligations. He had a wife and 2 young children, and what had days earlier been a functioning business, now reduced to him sitting alone in an empty office, genuinely wondering if everything he had built was gone. That failure rebuilt Dalio from the ground up, because what it forced him to confront was this: confidence and actual preparedness are 2 entirely different things. And in stage 3, where there is no long runway remaining to recover from a catastrophic mistake, confusing them is not a temporary setback. It can be permanent. People approaching stage 3 tend to fall into one of these 2 psychological traps. Either the paralysis of the disciplined saver who cannot shift from accumulation mode to deployment mode, or the overconfidence of the person who arrives at stage 3 with a large portfolio, feels invincible, and takes stage 2 risks in a stage 3 timeline. Which one are you more vulnerable to right now? That is worth genuinely sitting with, because the answer changes what you need to do next. Now we reach the third layer of this problem, and this one requires understanding something Dalio said publicly just months ago that most mainstream financial commentary has not yet taken seriously enough. When Dalio spoke at the Oxford Union recently, he was asked about global currencies and de-dollarization. His answer went much further than the question. He said that all fiat currencies, not just the dollar, not just the currencies of historically mismanaged economies, but every paper currency on earth, are in trouble because money is debt and debt is money. Every fiat currency that exists is ultimately a promise backed by the creditworthiness of a government that is spending more than it earns. And when that dynamic plays out across every major economy simultaneously, the people holding wealth in cash and conventional bonds are the ones whose purchasing power quietly evaporates. The United States government now spends more on interest payments than it spends on its entire defense budget. For the first time in modern history, that is pure arithmetic. And what that arithmetic means for someone in stage 3, drawing down a fixed pool of assets over a 20 or 30-year retirement, is that the monetary environment in which most conventional retirement strategies were designed no longer exists. Central banks globally are buying gold at rates not seen in 50 years, not because they are sentimental about history, because the people managing national treasuries are looking at the same debt dynamics Dalio has studied for 5 decades, and they are repositioning quietly before the general public understands what is happening. Gold is now the second largest reserve asset held by central banks worldwide. That is not coincidence. That is sophisticated institutional money moving early and leaving retail investors to figure it out later. So what do you actually do? Here are 3 specific concrete steps drawn directly from Dalio's framework that anyone in or approaching stage 3 can act on right now. The first step is to build a liquidity buffer before you need it, not after. This means setting aside 12 to 24 months of living expenses in short-term treasury securities or a treasury money market fund before you stop working, or immediately upon entering stage 3, not a savings account. Short-term treasuries specifically, because they currently yield 4 to 5%, they are fully liquid, they carry no meaningful risk of loss, and they give you the ability to cover your monthly expenses without touching your investment portfolio during a market downturn. If Robert had had 18 months of living expenses in short-term treasuries when he retired, the 38% market drop would have been painful to watch, but it would not have forced him to sell a single share at the bottom. He could have waited. The portfolio would have recovered. He would not be at the hardware store. The second step is to restructure your portfolio around what Dalio calls the all-weather principle, holding assets that respond differently to different economic conditions so that you are never fully exposed to any single type of disruption. In practical terms for stage 3, this means 3 buckets working simultaneously. The first bucket is your liquidity buffer, the short-term treasuries we just discussed. The second bucket is income-generating assets with genuine pricing power. Dividend aristocrats, specifically companies that have raised their dividends for 25 consecutive years or more in consumer staples, healthcare, and utilities. Companies that can raise prices when inflation rises and continue generating income regardless of what the broader market is doing. The third bucket is real stores of value, physical gold representing 10 to 15% of liquid net worth, not gold ETFs, not mining stocks, but physical metal stored securely, functioning as insurance against the exact monetary environment Dalio described at Oxford. These 3 buckets together create a structure where you are never forced to sell your most volatile assets to meet immediate needs, which is the specific mechanism that destroyed Robert's retirement, and the retirement of millions of people who made the same structural mistake. The third step is the one most people skip because it requires a level of honesty that is genuinely uncomfortable. You need to calculate your real stage 3 number. Not your wealth number, your real number. Take your total portfolio value. Subtract the estimated tax liability on tax-deferred accounts. Subtract a realistic estimate for advisory fees over a 20-year retirement. Apply a conservative inflation adjustment to understand what your purchasing power actually looks like in year 15 versus year 1. What remains after those reductions is your actual stage 3 capital. For most people, this number is 30 to 40% lower than the wealth number on their statement. Knowing that number now, today, while you still have time to add to it, restructure around it, and plan from it honestly, is the single most valuable financial exercise you can do before stage 3 begins. Dalio's core principle, pain plus reflection equals progress, applies here with particular force. It's the comfort of doing that honest calculation, of confronting the gap between your wealth number and your real number, of acknowledging that your current strategy may not be adequate for the stage 3 that actually exists right now. That discomfort is not a reason to avoid the conversation. It is the conversation, the reflection that leads to the preparation, that leads to a different outcome. Robert still drives past that house 3 streets over every single morning on his way to work, the one with the big yard where his grandchildren were supposed to visit on summer weekends, the one his wife pointed to for years and said maybe one day. He never bought it. He does not talk about it. But he drives past it every morning, and he knows exactly what the number on that mailbox represents. Not a house, but the 18 months he spent converting his life's work into grocery bills at the bottom of a market that eventually recovered without him. It did not have to end that way. It does not have to end that way for you. The gap between Robert's outcome and a different one was not intelligence. It was not discipline. Robert had extraordinary amounts of both for 30 years. The gap was one honest conversation about the rules of stage 3 that nobody ever had with him before the moment of truth arrived. You are having that conversation right now. The question is simply what you do next. If this video changed something in how you were thinking about stage 3, hit the like button. It helps more people find this content, and that genuinely matters. And leave a comment with this one question. Are you currently in stage 2 still building, or are you already in stage 3 navigating it? The honest answers in the comments section tend to be the most valuable part of these videos for the people watching after you. The next video covers the full all-weather portfolio structure in detail, the specific allocation percentages, the specific instruments, and the exact sequence for building it, whether you are entering stage 3 or already inside it. If you are within 10 years of retirement or already past it, that is the video you need to see next. Because stage 3 is the chapter most people spend their entire lives working toward. The only real question is whether you will arrive there prepared for the version of it that actually exists, or whether, like Robert, you will arrive prepared for a game that already changed.